Tonight, you will sleep.
Welcome, Frodo of the Shire. One who has seen the eye.
I'll just come out and say it. Rings of Power Episode 5 gets a 1 out of 10. Yes, this episode was so badly written, so meandering in its plot, had worse production values and choreography than the cheapest episode of Xena Warrior Princess, and so detrimental to the lore it's supposed to be attached to. No amount of decent acting or nice landscape shots could ever make up for this abominable piece of television. This is rock bottom for this show, because the only major development, outside of learning how stupid Nori and Isildur really are, is a table being moved to Khazad-dûm, based on a completely bullshit story. We have officially reached She-Hulk and Last Jedi levels of complete bastardization for these characters, this world, and any kind of stakes in this story, as you're about to see. We return to the backwards adventures of Nori and Discount Gandalf, who somehow managed to get a rudimentary understanding of English in a remarkably short period of time. She's explaining to him the migration patterns of Harfoots, who, I'd like to remind everyone, has still abandoned them to die behind them, and reassures him he's a good person, even though she knows next to nothing about him, and has seen firsthand his magic can be dangerous. Keep that in mind, because this is a setup for something incredibly stupid that's gonna happen later on. I know, you must be as shocked as I am at this point, right? Now they need to move on if they hope to catch up to the disgusting, backstabbing gypsies who left them to die, making their plotline in this episode particularly frustrating because I keep asking myself, why are you trying to catch up to people who left you to die and are going to mock your memory once you do? I can't stress just how much I wouldn't care if all of the Harfoots ended up dying because of wolves, trolls, big folk, and everything else Nori described to Discount Gandalf in the opening of this episode. We get a traveling montage, blanketed by Poppy singing what sounds like a 5-year-old's nursery rhyme, as their party wanders into bogs they could easily just walked around, roll down some hills, and all squeezed together in the same cart during a storm. Everyone loves a good travel montage through New Zealand, but as I've been saying since the beginning, I can't get invested because I barely know anything about these characters, and their goal isn't very compelling by itself. It might as well just be a completely different show, because nothing here has any bearing on what's going on in Numenor, Khazad-dûm, the Southlands, or Lindon. Evidently, the writers thought so too, which is why in this episode, we finally get introduced to an overarching villain for the Harfoots, Feminem, and his gang of slim ladies. Bear, I respect the hell out of you, but no sinister music track you play is going to make these three the least bit intimidating, or convince me one of them is Sauron. Speaking of obvious red herrings, we cut to Adar standing in the woods with one of his orc underlings. He informs him the tunnel the orcs have been digging is finished, which won't make sense later on, and Adar decides to hold his hand out in the sun to burn as he shares a little anecdote about, oh, this will be the last time he'll ever see it. Again, I have to point out that orcs have never been shown to burn up in the sun like vampires, otherwise these orcs who met the Uruks who kidnapped Merry and Pippin, and Azog the Pale Orc himself, would all be charcoaled 10 times over given how often they stand in direct sunlight across their movies. Anyway, that's all that happens in this scene, which leads straight into our resident girl boss herself, Bronwyn, preparing to give a rousing speech to her people.
I know I'm not the king you have awaited, but if you choose to stand with me and fight, this tower will no longer be a reminder of our frailty, but a symbol of our strength. Who among you will stand and fight?
I'm not seeing how this is supposed to rally them to fight, considering for one thing, you're just an herbalist who got lucky killing an orc because it was too stupid to move out of the way of you charging at it. Secondly, these people didn't have the forethought to bring food with them, so I highly doubt they brought along enough weapons to hold back an entire army of orcs. Thirdly, and this is my most burning question, what's stopping all of you from just leaving this tower? There's no food here. I assume you brought all of your valuables with you, and you know Adar's forces can't move in sunlight, which is incredibly stupid and contrived, but at least you know that. So what reason is there to not pack up all your things and just head north? Since all he said was you can either surrender or die, not that he's going to hunt you down to the ends of the earth, at least as far as you know because you don't know that he's after Theo's knife, yet. I get the writers wanted to emulate the speech Theoden gave to his people before the Battle of Helm's Deep, but these aren't the same circumstances at all, and it makes Bronwyn come across as stupid and naive because she has no fighting experience or leadership skills. which will be put into much sharper focus later on. Nevertheless, her flat speech somehow manages to inspire several people to raise their hands and follow her, only for the crowd to pull a complete 180 when the Sauron-loving dirty barkeep steps forward and offers an even more ridiculous counter-proposal.
I say be better to take our chances bowing to the supposed enemy. I'll say this for our ancestors. They lived!
Are you being serious? All you know about this guy is that he swore to come here and either kill all of you or force you to swear fealty to him. Bronwyn already told you that he ravaged the town of even bigger Sauron worshippers not too long ago, and surely Arondir must have mentioned how he enslaved all of the survivors who could work for him, as well as the elves from his company. You'd have to be certifiably mentally deficient to believe he's got anything good planned for you, which of course is why half of them up and leave to take their chances with Adar, making Bronwyn look even more inept as a leader. Theo stays behind though, which I guess you could call a development in his character, but now all the pieces are set for Rings of Power to do the bargain basement knockoff of the Battle for Helm's Deep. Don't get too excited though, because that battle's not in this episode. Now we're back to Numenor, and we see the people are in a complete uproar over going to war on Guyladriel's behalf. I'm sure this must look like chaos, considering Karl Marx Pharazôn can't even walk down the street without being assailed by protesters on every side. It's a common belief that people show you who they really are when their backs are against the wall, and they have to choose between their interests and the interests of others. And here, we get to see Discounter Hermione's, as she pulls Pharazôn's son aside, and we get to see what kind of people they really are.
There are many who feel as you do. Not enough to sway him yet, but give him the right push.
It must be you.
When I speak, his ears close up.
So speak louder.
To put this into perspective, she's insisting Beta Pharazôn here convince his father to not let anyone go save Middle-earth from a threat that plans to conquer all of the world. And here I thought Eärien was just a nothing character who only existed to go to Númenórean University and take part in a CW romance in this show. Oh no. It turns out she's actually a selfish, manipulative harlot who couldn't care less if all the people of Middle-earth were slaughtered by orcs, and uses this pathetic soy-pot of a man to condemn them to death on her behalf. I'm really seeing the benefits of inventing this character just to show how thoroughly unlikable and morally bankrupt she is, but I guess she's in good company on this show. We cut to the docks, where we see the Númenóreans are loading their armaments and cavalry onto the ships like they don't have a care in the world. But wait, weren't the Númenóreans just protesting in the last scene? You'd think if they really wanted to make a difference, they'd be picketing on the docks day and night against the soldiers literally arming for war. But this may as well be taking place on an entirely different planet compared to the last scene. The central conflict of this episode is that Númenor is divided, but you never see those two sides clash with one another on screen at any point. This could have been a great opportunity to really showcase who these characters are by exploring the motivations behind going to war and why they'd be willing to put their lives on the line. But this show isn't interested in that, as you're about to see with Isildur here.
Why wasn't I chosen for the expedition?
Thought you were going west.
Not anymore. Not till I've done something worthy of Númenor.
You might think Isildur is being noble here, willing to risk his life for the people of Middle-earth in order to prove his worth, similar to Faramir in the Two Towers. As it turns out, he's only interested in making a name for himself, and just wants his daddy to pull strings, exactly like the spoiled trust fund brat he was accused of being in the last episode, instead of earning his keep like every other soldier. Thankfully, Elendil is having none of that.
What are your qualifications?
Qualifications?
Do you belong to the Sea Guard?
You know I'm twice the same.
Do you belong to the Sea Guard?
The sea is always right!
The sea is always right!
What about the Queen's Guard? Merchant's Guild?
This is about uniform.
Horseman's Guild?
You're being absurd.
While you were feigning fidelity to the traditions of this isle, these men were living them.
I get what the writers are trying to go for here with Isildur, making him a wide-eyed youth who wants more out of life but is unaware of how dangerous and unforgiving the real world is. The big issue is he has no interesting or endearing traits as a character, and his goal is completely selfish and juvenile. Compare this to Éowyn from the Two Towers, who also wanted to prove herself on the battlefield.
You've some skill with a blade.
The women of this country learned long ago. Those without swords can still die upon them. I fear neither death nor pain.
Sure, she too didn't understand the brutality of war, something Éomer pointed out to her in a brilliant scene in the next movie.
You know as little of war as that hobbit. War is the province of men, Eowyn.
But the distinction between her and Isildur is that she was motivated to defend the people she loved, or at least fight by their side instead of waiting to die on the sidelines. When the time came to prove herself, she demonstrated that she was just as brave and capable as any other warrior, and nobody doubted her convictions when she charged headfirst into the orc hordes on Pelennor Fields, and especially when she did this.
You fool! No man can kill me.
I am no man.
Éowyn's a great character in both the books and the movies because they took the time to establish these traits, and while she did start out as naive, she was still a noble and admirable person at her core. Another great example of this type of character is Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean. One could argue his arc isn't as meaningful as Éowyn's, but it's still impactful to watch his progression throughout the first movie, from a meek, good-hearted blacksmith to a courageous, adventure-seeking pirate who earned Elizabeth's affection by the end. If only Disney still made movies like this. But getting back to Isildur, he's demonstrated none of these traits. I'm not saying he has to be motivated by helping others or impressing a girl, but as far as I can see, he just comes across as a college dropout who thinks joining the military would be cool, but doesn't really care about the responsibilities tied to the position. I haven't seen any evidence that he'd be able to cope with watching all of his friends die, or be able to fight off legions of orcs trying to kill him on all sides. As Éomer himself put it,
You would flee, and you would be right to do so.
one of the few gripes I have with Peter Jackson's movies was how much of a selfish asshole Isildur came across as. But I don't believe for 1 second this whiny spoiled brat could ever grow up to be the man willing to stand up against Sauron with his father's broken sword. I guess we can now add him to the pantheon of bastardized characters. We see Totally Not Sauron has taken up forging, and the camera lingers on this just to hammer home to the few brain-dead people in the audience what this is setting up. We then get this funny exchange.
Southlander, your visitors.
Showrunners, you do realize visitors typically go to the people they're visiting, not the other way around? Anyway, Tomirio wants to confirm where they're supposed to be going, which I don't really see the value of considering his information would be weeks, if not months, out of date, and for all they know, the Yorks could be long gone from that place. But never mind all that pesky logical planning, because this scene's main purpose is to firmly establish how much of a lying, manipulative cow Guyladriel really is.
As a matter of fact, it was my intention.
companion is merely feeling the weight of his task. I have no doubt, come time, he will do his part.
Guyladriel informed us.
I wondered how the Queen knew to lay me at her father's bedside. Never occurred to me you'd hand me over for a guild crest.
You used me.
Ever since you met this guy, you've been doing nothing but trying to force him to get what you want, and now you have the gall to accuse him of betraying you? You still have no solid confirmation that he's actually the king of the Southlands. So for all you know, you could be doing something you'll end up regretting for many years to come. The most outrageous thing about all this is that when Totally Not Sauron rightfully calls her out for using his lineage to serve her own purposes, she decides the best way to get him on board is through blackmail.
I have just convinced Numenor to send 5 ships and 500 men to aid your people and place a crown upon your head. Many might assume you used me.
At this point, I honestly can't decide whether Guyladriel or the CW's Batwoman is a more despicable protagonist. Keep in mind the latter let a sociopathic murderer go several times, and the former pretty much is a sociopathic murderer herself. Perhaps to offset how terrible Guyladriel came across here, it cuts away to the truly most evil characters in all of the Rings of Power, the Harfoots. Just in case you aren't convinced of that yet, here are their first lines of dialogue.
He's responsible, isn't he? The big fella.
What precisely do you expect me to do about it?
What you ought to have done at the camp. Take their wheels and leave them.
So it isn't enough that you basically abandoned this girl, her family, and her friend, whose family you also abandoned in a rock slide. Now you want to sabotage their carts to ensure they either starve to death or get eaten by predators in this barren forest? Well, That settles it. The Harfoots are officially more evil than the orcs. I almost wish Discount Gandalf really was Sauron like the writers keep trying to bait him as. So then he'll either kill or enslave the lot of them and do Middle-earth a great justice. Suddenly, wolves attack, and we get what's meant to be an intense chase scene, only I'm rooting for the wolves to eat all of them. I'm just saying, it'll be the most justified mauling in all of cinema. Sadly for us, Discount Gandalf steps in and uses his fart magic to scare them off. Now the other Harfoots see he's not so bad after all, proving Nori was right to help them all along. Man, wouldn't it be so unfortunate if something completely contrived and stupid happens later that harms Nori's perception of him and continues to pathetically bait that he may be Sauron in disguise? You know what? I'm just gonna skip ahead to it, because it's the last Harfoot scene in this episode, and it really is that dumb. So Discount Gandalf's off treating his arm by a pool because it got scorched up when he used magic. Nori turns up with some beeswax to help him out, and tells him how impressed the other Harfoots were with what he did, just to make the dramatic irony hit harder. As it turns out, he's got it covered.
Hey!
Really? You know he has magic, and he doesn't seem to be in any pain, so what are you so worried about? If you really wanted to stop him from hurting himself, why was your first thought to touch the arm that has ice crawling up it, instead of pulling him back from behind, or trying to get his attention some other way, without touching him? So yeah, everything that happened here was incredibly dumb, Nori's a complete idiot I have absolutely no investment in, and this melodrama is probably going to get resolved in the next episode pretty quickly, because nothing consequential has happened across 5 hours of this show. We return to Numenor, with Guyladriel and Elendil overseeing the new recruits spar with one another in the middle of an open street. Putting aside the obvious question why they aren't practicing near the palace, or in a barrack somewhere, I want to know where the people who are rioting about this elf leading all these people to war are. The city's supposed to be divided, but it seems all the people watching them practice have no objections to it, not even when Elendil asks Guyladriel herself to share her vast knowledge on how to kill orcs. And boy, what a lesson it is.
There are many ways to kill an orc. But for you, I will keep it strong and simple. Stab, twist, gut.
They say it isn't healthy to harbor negative emotions, but I'm pretty sure Guyladriel will literally die if she wasn't arrogant, smug, and manipulative in every scene. Also, I'm pretty sure Aragorn knows a more efficient method to kill an orc, especially after he used the method you described. We then get a horribly choreographed fight scene where every soldier is now wailing on Guyladriel, so one of them can land a hit and become lieutenant, while she gives more insightful advice on sword fighting than I'm pretty sure gave many sword experts aneurysms listening to.
Swordsmanship is about balance rather than strength. Fight with your feet, not your arms.
This one's my favorite because it blatantly contradicts what she did at the beginning of this series.
Never trust brute force to best an orc.
I highly recommend you check out Chadiversity's fight scene autopsy of this scene, because he does a great job explaining what makes great swordsmanship across many movies and shows, and this definitely isn't it. Between all the slow-mo, pretentious writing, and bad acting, I think these writers are a little too obsessed with the Matrix. The most recent one, to be exact. Isildur's friend manages to become lieutenant by scratching her dress, and Totally Not Sauron pulls off a small flourish to show off how cool he is, but it doesn't really impress anyone, besides Guyladriel. We cut back to Beta Pharazôn, trying to get his father to convince Tamriel to not go to war, only to reveal he wants to leverage the situation in his favor like a clever politician, but actually lacks the skill and forethought of a real one.
I go to war for Numenor.
How could this be for Numenor?
Soon we will save the low men of Middle-earth, lift them up and give them the king they've long awaited. A king who will be forever in our debt.
I know Numenorians can live for a long time, but establishing a stable kingdom in the Southlands that you can eventually use as an ally is going to take a couple of generations at the very least. This scheme would make sense if your son was in on it, but he's clearly not the sharpest spoon in the drawer. Also, we've only seen you speak to Totally Not Sauron once, so I'm not seeing why he'd even be grateful to you in the first place. But here we are, folks. We finally reached the only substantial plot point in this entire episode, with Fenward and Durin dining with Gil-galad in Lindon. Gil-galad inquires what the dwarves have been up to lately, prompting Durin to return the question, noting that the elves don't do anything quickly unless something big is happening. He puts it much more bluntly than I would have liked in a Middle-earth story, but I can at least believe a dwarf would say something like that to an elf, so it's not a big issue. We then get a strange scene where Durin tells the elves that the table they're dining on is actually made from stone that comes from one of their caverns, and is used to create monuments to their honored dead. I call it strange because later on, he reveals that he made the whole thing up just to give Disa a new table, but Gil-galad acts like they've been caught red-handed. So which is it? Is Gil-galad just humoring him by giving him the table he knows didn't come from dwarven stone? Or did the elves really steal it, and it was a wild coincidence that Durin made up a story that just happened to be true? I'm probably putting more thought into this than the writers did, so moving on. Gil-galad questions Fenward on whether or not the dwarves have found Mithril, and then commands him to tell him its origin story, which I'm sure pissed off many a Tolkien fan, including myself.
The heart is pure as Manwë, poured all his light into the tree to protect it. On the other, a Balrog of Morgoth channeled all his hatred into the tree to destroy it. Forging of their conflict, their power.
Yeah, none of that ever happened, and that's not how Mithril works. Otherwise, Frodo would have been completely healed from his Morgul blade wound when Bilbo gave him the vest. Fenward was sent to Khazad-dûm because Gil-galad wanted Mithril in order to stop the elves from diminishing thousands of years before that was actually supposed to happen. Now, his big conflict in this episode is to figure out whether to tell the truth in order to save his people, or break his promise to his friend. But he pretty much already did tell Gil-galad the dwarves found something valuable, and it's not clear what he even plans to do with this information. Invade them? Negotiate a trade deal? It turns out it doesn't matter either way, because Fenward confesses to Durin, in Rings of Power's trademark terrible dialogue.
So why don't you come out with it?
Because a burden shared may either be halved or doubled, depending on the heart that receives it.
Oh, Owl's beard! Enough with the quail sauce! Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
And people said Frodo and Sam had homoerotic undertones. Now they plan to mine Mithril again, and that's gonna be their story the next episode. Meanwhile, back on Numenor, everyone's celebrating about going to war. I guess all these people must be schizophrenics. Isildur once again demonstrates how much of a Weasley, opportunistic beta he is, by apologizing to his friends so they can arrange for him to be put into the cavalry with them. Honestly, I don't see why his friend is so angry at him, considering after he got fired from the Sea God, he's now in a much higher ranked position. But I still appreciate that he decks him for being a terrible friend and dropout loser all the same.
2. Actually...
Hey, the sea is always right, right? Seriously, that's how they end that scene.
Sorry, Isil. The sea is always right.
So Beta Pharazôn climbs onto one of the ships with the intention of torching it, only to discover that the one he picked happens to have Isildur trying to stow away on it. The two of them get into a scuffle, and I know I've been ragging on Isildur this entire episode, but I'm not seeing how this experienced sailor is having so much trouble subduing this wispy cuck. Jesus, was that ship filled with C4? Because oil doesn't explode like that. Also, great job ensuring Numenor can defend itself by destroying its warships, dumbass. Isildur drags him back to the pier, and then gives a terrible cover story for what they were doing in the water in the first place.
What happened? He was in a fishing boat. A cask must have gone up. A cask?
How does anyone believe that? They were seen swimming away from the burning wreckage, and are the only two people on the scene. Guyladriel and Totally Not Sauron were arrested for much lesser offenses, but these two get away scot-free? Well, naturally, because this is the point in the episode where Elendil realizes that Isildur is ready to be a soldier, even though all he did was demonstrate how stupid and untrustworthy he is. Not to mention he's still unqualified. This event doesn't go over too well with Tarmiriel, who's having doubts about their expedition after her father told her, don't go to Middle-earth because there's darkness there. Karl Marx Farazan wants to call the whole thing off, even though from his perspective, he still has every reason to push forward and gain his allies in the south. Guyladriel insists they should push forward because they still have 3 ships, which can apparently hold 100 people along with their equipment and horses apiece. Tamriel says she doesn't want to go forward until Totally Not Sauron gives his support, so Guyladriel pays him a visit. To her credit, she actually does apologize for using his lineage to her benefit, and then proceeds to throw away that goodwill immediately by asking him to side with her in the War Council tomorrow to ensure Tamriel goes through with her invasion plan. Totally Not Sauron tries to turn her down again, but she persists, saying that helping her kill legions of orcs will surely help him get over his tortured past. He makes it abundantly clear that he's not a noble person by any stretch, but Guyladriel tries to counter this by using villainous logic.
Sometimes to find the light, we must first touch the darkness.
So the ends always justify the means no matter how terrible and depraved they are, and a hero can't be virtuous unless they do something evil first? You know what this reminds me of?
All who gain power are afraid to lose it, even the Jedi.
The Jedi use their power for good.
Good is a point of view, Anakin.
But Totally Not Sauron demands to know why she fights. And at last, we finally get a clear motivation behind all of Guyladriel's arrogant, condescending, and manipulative actions. It turns out, she's a kill-crazy sociopath. I'm not saying that as a joke like all the other times. She's legitimately a compulsive, vindictive, and truly deranged sociopath.
Why do you keep fighting?
Because I cannot stop.
That's right. It's not for justice or to help anybody. It's just an excuse to take out her frustrations on others and avoid confronting her deep-rooted issues. She only sees people as either tools she can use to facilitate her bloodlust, irritating fools who get in her way and she doesn't have the time or patience to educate, or enemies actively conspiring against her just for not following all of her crazy ideas. Just listen to her try to play the victim after all the terrible things she does to people.
The company I led mutinied against me.
No, they turned against you because you tried to leave one of them in the snow, and you let them get bashed around by a troll. They should have turned against you sooner because you were going against your king's orders, and blindly leading them across Middle-earth with no plan.
My closest friend conspired with the king to exile me.
You spent that entire conversation being a condescending bitch to Fembron, so calling the two of you friends is a very big stretch. Sending you away to prevent an upcoming war with the orcs was pretty stupid of him and Gil-galad, admittedly, but they also had no reason to believe your wild claims either.
You have an amazing capacity for self-deception. How do you do that?
Bottom line, this character is a conceited and awful person, made infinitely worse as a botched representation of somebody who was the complete opposite of that. Even when Totally Not Sauron tries to sympathize with her, she throws it back in his face and urges him to do what she wants in order to find peace, even as she admits in the same sentence that killing orcs hasn't brought her any closer to finding peace herself for centuries. Now we're back with the dirt farmers, swearing their undying loyalty to Adar with the belief that he's Sauron come to uplift them all. They figure out he's not Sauron, but he's still willing to let them serve him if they pay a price.
Only blood can bind.
Well, I guess he's okay with only half of them serving him. I think he would have been smarter to get the boy to kill the old man, considering I don't see how much use he'll be in your army or in your labor force. I guess half these people are going to learn the hard way that expecting the leader of an orc army to be generous and merciful wasn't the best idea. Theo's trying to practice with his bow as Arondir gives pointers from the sidelines. Once again, they try really hard to emulate a scene from Lord of the Rings, but it just isn't working with these characters. Theo shows him Sauron's blade, and Arondir remembers, oh yeah, we had a painting of that on the side of this tower, but we let it get overgrown for some reason. Bronwyn sees this and decides they should just surrender because their people are always doomed to darkness, and it's hopeless to fight back. I can see why so many people didn't take her seriously as a leader earlier. Arondir believes they have days, no, maybe hours before Adar's forces show up. And that's where this plotline ends in this episode. Totally Not Sauron is mulling over Guyladriel's words to him before he's summoned to the council, and decides, screw finding peace. I'll jump right back into a life of war and death. What could go wrong? Now we're finally leaving Numenor, in ships I don't believe could hold 30 people and horses, much less 100. Discount Hermione disapproves, but nobody cares. Isildur's a stable boy in the ship. Tarmiriel decides to wear a scale-patterned shirt instead of armor. Guyladriel is wearing armor with Feanor's crest, which the real Guyladriel would hate, and stands side by side with Totally Not Sauron doing his best Aragorn cosplay as the credits roll. I hope it's become clear just how unengaged I am with this show, outside of it being terribly written and how disrespectful it is to Tolkien's legacy. It's not even fun to mock like The Room or Batwoman, but soul-crushing to get through, because of how hard this show tries to be taken seriously, and yet how little effort they put into it in order to accomplish that. It's the most expensive show in the history of television, and yet its writing, acting, special effects, direction, and editing all fall short compared to a series made with 1/10 its budget and a far sillier premise. I can confidently say that if I wasn't watching this show just to review it, or to see how it'll bastardize Tolkien's lore and characters further, I definitely would have checked out long before now. But we still have a few more episodes to go in this season, so if you're willing to follow along with me, then stay tuned for more reviews.